thank you to Nicholas and the entire Capital Link team. A great event as always, and I think it was mentioned that it's the 14th year in Athens. In my case, I think it's about the 12th year that I've been working with Nicholas, Olga, and the Capital Link team. So at this stage, I'm just pleased that they haven't got bored of me. So welcome. We'll be moderating the Commercial Banking Summit panel this year. It's entitled Adapting to New Commercial and Industry Realities. And with the amount of things that change in shipping over 12 months, I think it's probably a title that we could have every year. But I'm sure our panelists will have plenty to say on the topic as well. Just to briefly introduce myself and the panelists, my name is Jasel Chauhan. I'm Head of International Finance at Dickinson. Another stellar list of international banks and panelists to help us with the discussion today. To my left, Anastassia Tcherneva, Global Head of Shipping at ABN AMRO. Vasilios Maroulis, Managing Director, Global Industry Head, Shipping Logistics and Offshore at Citi. And Christos Tsakonas, Head of Global Shipping at DNB. And as I mentioned, apologies from Evan Cohen of CIT, who wasn't able to join today. So with that, and catching up on our time slot, we'll get straight into the questions. As usual, we'll start with an overview of the prior 12 months and what the banks anticipate for the year to come. And just to give a bit of context to that, as I mentioned, a year in shipping is a very long time. Several of the topics from last year, for example, decarbonization, obviously, energy crisis, geopolitics, war, interest rates, they're still all relevant topics for today, perhaps from a different perspective. Decarbonization, which we'll speak about in particular, has perhaps moved a bit more on from the why, and now a little bit more focused on the how and when. Energy markets have adapted in good and bad ways, but we still have war and shipping routes being affected again. So in that context, I think the first question we'll start with is how have each of the banks weathered the different storms and their shipping portfolios over the last year? Anastassia, would you like to start with that one?
That's quite a big question to start with. Thank you. So yeah, well, shipping is a industry that I would say can weather a lot of storms, and as always, last year we also went with the waves. It's been actually a very good year for shipping, and I would say for all involved shipping banks, we are looking at a stellar year, not free of challenges, but on balance actually quite good. So now all hands on deck looking at the future and the challenges that I'm sure we will touch upon in no time.
Yeah, I'll echo what Anastassia said. It's clearly all segments have performed very strongly, maybe with the exception of the container operators, but even there, you know, given the latest developments, you've seen significant increases in rates in 24, and then of course, the capital structures of most of the corporates are in a very strong place, and therefore they can weather, fluctuation in rates and significant decreases. And also, for many of the operators, they've diversified their businesses, and therefore cash flow is not only being generated by vessel operations. With regards to all other segments, I think they've been in a very strong place, and therefore I think undoubtedly all portfolios have seen significant repayments, but at the same point in time, we've also had very meaningful new originations, and therefore the needs of the industry is very significant. There are multiple things that are coming into play, whether that's fleet renewal as a result of ESG considerations, primarily of course, all solutions that are there will be needed, whether that's consolidation. And I think increasingly we're seeing more stability, further strength, and a significant demand for the capital that the banks have to deploy. So it's a very interesting mix, and I think of course, you're seeing a contraction in terms of capital deployment I think, to the smaller ship owners, if you want to call it that, and significant further capital for the larger ones, which is therefore creating a mismatch, I think, in terms of pricing considerations.
Thanks, Vasilios. Christos?
Well, I think it is our clients really that are weathering the storms and the challenges. We just have to select the ones that have the track record and have shown that they know how to weather the storms. And so that has been our job, and we have a long track record now of observing how people behave. So it's a bit easier to do. Having said that, it is a very uncertain time, as the other panelists said. We have very high asset prices, and yes, the outlook in most segments is positive, so that counterbalances the prices somewhat. We have the decarbonization challenges that we referred to. Basel IV is putting pressure on Western banks on the cost of capital. We have sanctions and the geopolitical uncertainty that comes around it. But just to Vasilios' point, last point about availability of capital for smaller companies, I mean, we do see quite a bit of liquidity in shipping at the moment. And I would say that smaller companies, particularly in Greece, have managed to access maybe different pockets of liquidity than some of the bigger clients do. But I will agree with you, Vasili, that indeed, larger companies today tick more boxes. It's easier to raise capital, and it's easier to get on the radar screen of the bigger financial institutions. But there is capital also for the smaller ones, and we see it. Be it alternative finance providers, be it a number of the Greek banks that are very active these days. So there is a lot of money to go around.
Thanks, Christos. And so, I mean, it was generally a positive start to the finance and banking panel. I suppose picking up on what Christos mentioned, still lots of challenges ahead. And I think we probably have a long list of those to go through. But I suppose before picking on some of those challenges, I mean, I think in respect of the last year in particular, I would ask the panelists, what was the biggest challenge, or what had the biggest impact on lending throughout the last year before we start to look forward? Obviously things like decarbonization and some of the issues that Christos mentioned in relation to sanctions, international trade. But what was the biggest thing that changed? And there did seem to be a little bit of a change, whether that was more availability of capital and liquidity. But what would each of the panelists say that had the biggest impact last year?
Well, from ABN AMRO's perspective, we were very keen to continue generating good returns, and with ample liquidity in the market and prepayments, that was a balancing act, so we were very focused on returns. Cost of capital is already a topic, and we will in a second turn to models, but it's something that we've been paying a lot of attention to, which also reflects into our return analysis. And the cost of liquidity, I mean, it's a dollar business, so that's something that is quite important for a market which is 50%, and in the 50% we would include the Citi group, who is an American bank, but quite a lot dominated by European banks who are predominantly funded in euros, and a start into looking how to have assets that we believe that can be decarbonized in the time to come. So that's also something that was part of our new business intake, if you will.
Great, thanks. Vasilios?
Look, I think each and every element of what Anastassia mentioned, and also what you've indicated, is something that is being considered every year. So I wouldn't say that, 23 or looking forward to 24 is, there are any different considerations, if you wish. Of course, the decarbonization element is an important factor in determining quite a few things. But again, even there are no, there are multiple solutions. There is no clear path, if you wish, and therefore, and I strongly believe that each and every solution is required. What is extremely important as far as Citi is concerned is a clear view and a strategy and a willingness to go down the path of what is required to be done. As far as Citi, we are not asset financiers, we are corporate financiers, and therefore we look at the corporate as a whole, the cash flow generation of it, and of course its balance sheet and everything else, and therefore on the back of that be able to perform the corresponding analysis and see how it is that we can assist across all potential solutions. But I would be saying, clearly, and 23 was a year of, a strong year for almost all segments, I would say. I think a year where significant transactions were executed, and I think the same pattern will follow in 24. And we have seen a year where, yes, significant repayments have taken place as a result of excess liquidity, but also significant capital allocations have taken place, which have more than replenished our portfolio.
Right, and Christos, just to add a little bit to the question and one of the points that you raised earlier about smaller owners and having access to finance as well. I mean, one of the topics we've discussed over the years has been to do with competition and a different variety of funding these days with leasing and private equity. And different options available. That has now seemingly become part of the everyday business. And to what extent has that kind of settled alternative source of finance actually helped support the international bank finance and some of the more strategic goals as well there?
I mean, I can talk about financing alternatives. I think we see, as I said before, there is plenty of capital. There is a lot of capital in the market, and certainly more capital than there are projects. Because new buildings are scarce, there is uncertainty about new technologies. But I see more of a distinction between financing sources in the Western world, and financing sources in the East. If we look at the Western world, European banks, American banks to an extent, we see a very big focus on decarbonization that we do not see so much in the East. We see increasing costs coming with Basel IV. That's not something that is affecting or will be affecting Eastern banks yet. Yes, Western banks tend to be more predictable than banks in the East, but what I see is a heavy burden of regulation on Western banks, and I don't see it so much on the eastern part of the world. What counterbalances there, as I said before, is higher uncertainty, bigger geopolitical risk. If you look at Taiwan, if you look at China, so borrowers are cautious. But I would say we start to see more of a bifurcation now. A lot of capital available, but different pros and cons. On the challenges that we spoke before, other than the geopolitical, the biggest one I saw last year, and what we've been struggling with, is really setting a realistic decarbonization path. I think sometimes we get too carried away. There are a lot of technologies, as Vasilios said. There is a lot of uncertainty around this technology. There is a lot of risk around this technology. And while we encourage clients to look at them, experiment with them, I think it's extremely important that we look at ways at extending the life of existing vessels. There is a lot you can do with existing ships. There is a lot of investment you can put on existing ships to make them greener. And common sense says that rather than building something which is on an untested technology yet, yes, you should experiment on it, but the bulk of the effort should be on prolonging the life of existing ships, making them more efficient, making them greener, and meeting your targets in that way.
Great, thanks, Christos. And I think that moves on very nicely to the topic of decarbonisation. And certainly, as I mentioned at the beginning, I mean, a lot happens in 12 months. I think probably this time last year, there was a lot more discussion in terms of actually focusing on why it needs to be done and potentially having to, make the topic more real. Now that seems, if I've seen the market correctly, that it's actually has almost turned a corner a little bit more. That there is a little bit more focus on the how and when. Anastassia, I know you're very focused on the decarbonisation aspects, and would you agree with that there has been a bit of a turning of a corner and focusing on how this gets done now?
Yes, I definitely agree that we are turning a corner. And if I would compare the amount of energy and the dialogue that we have with our clients, prospects, with our peer banks, decarbonization is dominating this dialogue a lot more than it used to 5 years ago. So I think the direction of travel is very clear. We can have a long debate on the speed of it. I do think that the speed that will be driven by regulations, whether we like it or not, that's what I think will be a driving force, and also seeing more and more climate disasters out there. So it is a huge challenge, but I think it's also a great opportunity. And one thing that I want to mention to the comparison that Christos made between the pros and cons of West and East, if you look at West, our stakeholders are somewhat different than those of East. So if you look at Western societies, there's quite a lot of push on decarbonization. We see a lot of NGOs also being focused in continental Europe on that topic. So we have quite a complex and wide stakeholder group to manage as European banks. And we also have a regulator that is very keen that banks are the catalyst of this change. So our role has also changed quite a lot in the past 10 years. We are also guardians of client data, and we need to think along of the solution. Something that really struck me a couple of weeks ago, our chief economist actually said something that I thought was quite positive. So we always say at ABN AMRO, it's not our transition, it's the sustainability transition of our clients, and we want to enhance it. So there's a challenge at hand for our clients, and we would like to take the opportunity to be part of the solution. It's going to be complex and probably take longer than what we all think, and the solutions will be various.
And just touching on a few of those aspects, Vasilios, is that obviously there does seem to be this kind of hopefully positive progress that we're turning a corner. But I think one of the things that you've mentioned before that is potentially the biggest fleet renewal project that we're looking at since the end of World War II. So it's certainly not to underestimate the challenges ahead. And I just want to take your views on how big that challenge really is.
Look, I think first of all, what's extremely important, and I'm saying it both to our regulators, to our stakeholders, and of course, to each and every person that, wishes to listen to me, is that this industry is far more advanced in its thinking about decarbonization versus almost each and every other. Undoubtedly, the pressure that will be applied to the shipping industry will come from the charters and the cargo providers. And that is coming. It's coming in force, and because each and every charter has made Scope 3 commitments. Those, of course, you need to go from Scope 1 to Scope 2 and then to Scope 3, but at some point, investors will be focusing also on those commitments and how they are achieved. So each and every solution that is out there will be required. I think increasingly there will be additional considerations that will come into play, which therefore means that solutions that one may be looking at today could be slightly different tomorrow, and that's because, for example, if you need to prolong the life of the assets, you need to be in a position to, I think, increasingly, people will take into consideration the carbon footprint of a new building process. Been reading quite a few studies. Some people are even suggesting that it's 10 years of emissions of the corresponding vessel, 10 to 15 of the actual new building process and its CO2 footprint. So when will that come into play? It remains to be seen. But it undoubtedly will. And then also the other element, which I think is quite important, is yes, you build a methanol vessel or an ammonia-powered vessel. At the same point in time, it's the green hydrogen ultimately is how can it be used in the most efficient way? And therefore, I do believe that at some point it could be considered as, are you utilizing, even if you have the vessel that is effectively totally green, will you be allowed to do it, to utilize these green molecules to effectively power the global fleet, or do you use it somewhere significantly closer to actual production of those green molecules? So I think all of these things are extremely important. I think that's why I say, it's a journey. It's the companies that we back need to consider all of these elements. I think they will come into play, which may make decisions significantly easier. And I think increasingly, at least for us, if I look direction of travel of how we will look at the portfolio, is we will look at the CO2 emissions of the corporate as a whole, and not the corresponding asset that we are financing. So you won't be able to get away with, okay, I have a fleet of 50 vessels which are old, but I have a brand new vessel, and can you please finance it? That's not going to be, or it will be if it's the beginning of a journey which takes you to where we want to be part of.
I agree 100% with what Vasilis said. The challenge here is because there is so much uncertainty around, and because indeed some of the greener fuels might be diverted to other industries because they make more sense from a global perspective, the trajectories that we tie ourselves to today have to be realistic, or they need to give us sufficient flexibility to be able to adjust the route. Because what might happen is, if we are very strict with limited information today, we might be forced not to lend to the industry, and that we do not want to do. We want to be part of the transition. We have been part of this industry for 100 years. We've seen vessels move from sails to steam and the combustion engine. We are going to be around now again, but we want to make sure that the commitments we make to our investors and to our stakeholders have enough flexibility to accommodate all this uncertainty that we see in the world. And again, common sense has to prevail. Resources need to be allocated efficiently globally. That makes a lot of sense. We should not be forcing owners to build ships that they don't feel comfortable with because we only make available financing for this type of technologies. We should be pushing people, as I said before, to find ways to prolong the life of existing ships. And we need to make sure that these type of ships are accepted within the broader value chain, be it the charterers and be it the overall trade. So common sense needs to prevail a little bit, and the trajectories we communicate need to provide realism and flexibility so that we are not forced to make suboptimal decisions as financial institutions.
If I may say one thing, I mean, a lot of talk about Poseidon principles, trajectories, and everything else, but fundamentally, the banks are following what the IMO is indicating, right? So we are heavily regulated institutions, and we are following the guidance of the global regulator for the industry that we're participating in. So it's not something that we have come up with and said, okay, this is what we're going to do. I think that's extremely important to be understood. And I think increasingly, what I want to say to each and every one that is here, your voice is extremely strong and needs to be heard more. The fact of the matter is, I have countless situations in which, for example, there are LNG dual fuel vessels, and the charter ultimately decides the bunker, how it will bunker, and if it's slightly more expensive, even if it's, on the LNG side, then it's available. The charter usually goes even for $1, HFO. So that, of course, is something that needs to be discussed and, and communicated clearly that ultimately there are some things that are within our control and some things that are not. But again, I do sincerely believe that this industry has gone, 5 years ago, these discussions will not be had, and I think, the future is very, very bright, especially when I see it versus every other industry that we look at.
It's actually that exact point I wanted to pick up on, say, looking back 5 years or 10 years. I remember when our panel discussions were about LTV, financial covenants, and very more ordinary ship finance aspects. But it seems these days, and I guess the banks and the panelists don't always get that much sympathy. But just pausing a second, that actually, from just being about financing assets, the panelists are now chemists, naval architects, geopolitical analysts, as well as the wider picture, when it comes to choosing fuel choices, the type of projects that are put forward, and assessing that. So, and that's even before you get to things like interest rates, Basel IV, capital requirements. So, the face of international shipping banks has certainly changed. And I'll throw this question open to the panel. How have each of you and the banks faced those challenges of how ship finance itself has changed, whether to focus on things like decarbonization or the whole changing shape of the challenges to shipping?
Ship financing and the way we look at risk evolves all the time. And yes, indeed, decarbonization was not an issue in our analysis before. We used to call them credit papers. Credit is one of the aspects that we analyze now, but we have sanctions, we have geopolitical uncertainty that has a very big impact. New technologies, that has a very big impact. What is the life of a ship that's being built today? Is it going to be 20, 25 years? Is it going to be significantly shorter? So it's a much more rounded analysis that we have to do, rather than purely focus on the value of the asset today or the pricing, which is what we did before. But this is what keeps us young and interested in the industry, right?
Look, it all comes down to client selection, right? As far as I'm concerned, we are following what our clients want to do. And we want to be there for the clients that we decide, and the clients that want to do business with us, and we want to do business with them, for the projects that make sense. And ultimately, again, extremely important is to have a strategic view as to where the company that you're either leading, owning, or be a part of as management, where do you want to go? And then we have clear views as to where we are going. And again, I do agree with Christos, that there is a clear divergence in terms of where some institutions are going, and it's not a competition. All the capital sources will be required for this monumental shift that needs to take place. I do sincerely believe, and we're seeing it already, that the charterers on some segments are beginning to apply significant more pressure. And therefore, I think increasingly the changes will be felt. So it's extremely exciting, and but I do sincerely believe that the most important element for us is by far client selection and strategic thinking.
So I can only echo what Christos and Vasilis said. What I would like to add is data, the value of data and artificial intelligence. I really think that this industry is so rich on data, and we have not taken maximum use of it. And looking at how the world is turning, that will be increasingly more important, and that goes hand in hand with decarbonization. We'll also be looking at more integrated value chains as capital and finance providers, because I do believe that also the business model will be changing, the role of charters, the role of ship owners. I very much agree what Vasilis said is the client selection, but is also the filters, if you will, and the assessments that banks are doing, at least in the West, has changed significantly. So to your point, from very much like a credit view, we are looking at a decarbonization view. So that also requires different skill set from ourselves, and I think this is where it's important to remain intellectually curious and work together. And I very much aspire to what you said, Vasilis. We are peers. I believe in competition, which is also the base for game theory. This is going to be an incredibly expensive transition, and we need all hands on deck.
Thank you. And I think as we're starting to run out of time, I think it probably gives a chance of one last topic, and that's probably along the lines of, exactly where each of the banks do see 2024 moving forward, what types of transactions. Certainly, each of the banks and the panelists involved in some headline and record-breaking transactions over the last year. And I think I'll probably qualify that question that if everyone has a preference for exactly the same transaction, then we'll need to discuss who's better for that transaction. So what are the different ideas for 2024?
Maybe I start. I mean, what we see is very strong markets, and we are very happy for that. It's been many years since we've seen most of the shipping sectors pointing upwards. Now, typically, bankers complain when companies are over-levered, so we cannot complain now that they're making a lot of cash and they're paying down the debt. I think that's a very good thing, and it's very healthy for the industry. We see quite a bit of consolidation happening already, and these are different ways that we work with our clients. We advised Frontline in the acquisition of Euronav. We've seen a number of companies going private. We advised Jasel on the take private of the MLP. We advised 𝘚𝘧 on the take private of the MLP. So there are different ways to really use our banking skills in this market. And still, there are some very good deals that we see. Some of them tied to capital market deals, but some not. The banks here, we were part together with Citi and ABN on the Jasel big refinancing that showed a lot of appetite for good projects. We see banks putting bigger tickets forward. So we are working in different ways, and we are very happy to be working with companies that have very healthy balance sheets, as opposed to struggling, which is the story we had many times in the past.
No, look, I'll echo that. There are very large projects in play, with regards to 24. So I think watch this space. There are lots of things that are happening as we speak, and undoubtedly will be announced in the near future. I think all the transactions that Christos mentioned were groundbreaking, and ultimately extremely important for the industry. We play part in advising our clients, providing capital, significant capital in play, and also, of course, being able to sort of provide a view to be able to utilize the various tools that are there in order for the corresponding companies to achieve what they want. And whether that's capital markets, whether that's private capital, of course, bank financing, ECA, and of course our advisory business. So all of that coming into play, and I think increasingly though, for this year, what I am seeing is very, very large transactions which are being structured as we speak and to be executed.
Yeah, so what I would like to add to everything that was said is that, we are peers and we are in this together. Of course, we have different geographic scopes, we differ in size, and our focus is now and then different. For ABN AMRO, what will be very important is the balancing act of still be a good partner for our clients and provide the right capital structures, while engaging on ESG and preparing for what's to come. And something that I take great interest of actually is also engaging into new projects, as in new technology, and how we could also look at different capital structures, so more seed capital, venture type of capital. We are a significant debt provider, but we would also like to take some modest stakes in projects where we do believe they have a good chance to scale up.
Great, thank you. And I suppose just to sum up before we do run out of time, it's been a positive 23, and work certainly started in the right direction. There's certainly more work to be done, lots more challenges out there. but there seem to be the financial tools to help that and progress. So I think on that note, I'll just take the opportunity to thank my fellow panelists and everyone for listening. Thank you very much.